Hello, and thank you for joining us to this wonderful presentation with Elina Halonen. She is the founder and principal at Square Peg Insight, and she is a behavioral scientist, a strategy consultant, and her interest and experience throughout her whole career have given her a unique perspective on behavior. So today she's going to be making us ponder a little bit about why are we referring to LLMs like people? Why aren't we having other perspectives as to how we can reason with LLMs? So with that, Elina, it's a pleasure to have you, and yeah.
Thank you very much. Apologies in advance if I have to cough because that may happen, but let's hope not. So yes, thank you so much for inviting me to talk about this. Um, Unlike many other people here today, I'm actually not specifically like an AI specialist, but pretty much everything in the world has something to do with someone's behavior. So, but I am a behavioral science specialist. That's my specialty, and so that's how I have approached this topic as well. And so what I want to talk about is actually a little bit of a thought or like a perspective shift of whether, is human intelligence actually the best benchmark for AI? Because I've seen, as everyone has seen a lot of talk about this, and that's usually what we use as a benchmark. So let me see. There we go. There's that clicker to next. And so the key point that I want to kind of share with you today, or kind of like go over with you today, is that for decades we've been focused on one question, like when will AI match human intelligence? And everyone who's at a conference like this or an event like this has surely seen all the conversations and all the discourse and all the comments and viewpoints about when will we reach AGI. But something that I've been thinking about in the background is, what if we've been asking the wrong question all along? Like, is it really human intelligence that we should be using as a benchmark? And just as a bit of background, the my route to thinking about this actually also is also linked to the other big love in my life, in addition to human behavior and understanding human behavior, it's dog training. I do a lot of training with these two dogs of mine, and so when I'm not thinking about human behavior, I think about dogs. And and dog training. All of a sudden, some months ago, it actually occurred to me that what I was reading about a lot of AI, how AI's LLMs are trained, and so on. A lot of it seemed really familiar, and I suddenly realized that there's actually a parallel to dog training as well. So that's how I got into this originally, and yeah, I have sort of two perspectives into this, both from a human and dog side. And so what I want to start with is kind of challenging the anthropocentric view that we have of AI. So for years we've had this narrative, and especially in the past 2 years, the narrative around AI has been a lot about, will AI and when will AI surpass human intelligence? Will the robots, will the AI, will the use of LLMs, will that take our jobs? And what has actually happened as a consequence of that is that there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of resistance to using. AI has obviously been around for a while in different shapes and forms, shapes and sizes and forms, but specifically after they have become much more available to the general public and outside of just bigger organizations, then now that has become much bigger question. So my challenge to you today is, instead of asking, can AI replace humans? What if we asked instead, how can AI augment human abilities? Not entirely sort of original question. There are other people who talk about this. I wholeheartedly recommend Ethan Mollick's book, Co-Intelligence. That is a very good exploration into that. But I wanted to actually talk a bit more bit more broadly. And so thinking back into history, so some of the other things that I've read in this space that have made me think about it is, for example, a book called A New Breed by Kate Darling. And there she talks a lot about, she's not talking about LLMs or AI, she's talking about robots. That's her specialty. And she talks a lot about our history of working with animals and using animals to augment our own abilities as humans, because we're actually not necessarily very capable by ourselves. And the heart of that is that the most successful partnerships in life are complementary and not competitive. We've developed a lot of different ways of working with animals, and kind of by fostering communication and collaboration between and across different species. And the goal of doing that is to leverage the unique and very, very specialized intelligence that different animals have. So, for example, this is a falcon. Obviously, falcons have been used for hundreds and hundreds of years, if not thousands, for hunting, because we're quite clumsy and quite not very agile as humans, nor can we fly and have that perspective. But as you can imagine, it's actually not a very easy task to train a predator bird of prey who doesn't really need to be with us. So that's a really interesting example of how we've used different animals. And so what I started to wonder some months ago is that what if we applied some of these same principles to our interactions with AI? And instead of trying to create a digital human, maybe it would be helpful to instead think about creating sort of digital familiars, like AI systems that have very specialized capabilities that complement our own abilities. And so but part of the problem is that for decades, our measures of AI and the success of AI have been very anthropocentric. So where humans are always, the benchmark. You'll see that I have, you'll see this if you're following the AI, let's say, discourse. You'll see people sharing papers that are about, has ChatGPT passed the Turing test, and where the various papers and research on studies on how LLMs, for example, perform different games like chess and poker. There are a lot of research. There's a lot of research on reasoning abilities, and obviously how LLMs will generate human-like text and so on. Can they make small talk? All that kind of stuff. So it's very clear that we are using humans as a benchmark, and that is quite logical at the surface, because for a very long time, we've also been comparing other species to ourselves too. There is a huge literature of comparative intelligence that looks at the cognitive abilities of different species of animals. For example, if you're not familiar with it, if you look up, for example, the cognitive abilities of crows and corvids in general, they are quite remarkable. And so there is a huge literature on this, but the big problem at this is that for decades we used humans as a benchmark. And so we said, for example, we thought that animals don't have theory of mind. And theory of mind is basically the ability to look at something from another individual, another entity's perspective. We measured that, for example, by looking at whether elephants will recognize themselves in a mirror, whether dogs will recognize themselves in a mirror. But actually, in the past 10 years or so, we've been changing that benchmark and kind of questioning whether it's useful to have human benchmarks for theory of mind, or should we use species specific. And now we have research that shows that, for example, dogs will recognize, and everyone knows that dogs will read the local news through sniffing, let's say, poles or fences and so on. And it's now been shown that dogs actually recognize their own scent. And so now we're using benchmarks that are appropriate or starting to use benchmarks that are appropriate for different species. And so all this kind of led me on a track of looking at the different specialized intelligences in nature and thinking about that could be, that could be a model for AI. And in many cases it is. So for example, we have so many examples of very specialized intelligence that we as humans, actually, if you compare us to that, we are quite inferior and very incapable compared to some of the abilities that animals have. They can't necessarily use a computer, but they don't need to. So I think there's an interesting comparison there. So, for example, birds will navigate using Earth's magnetic field. That feels nothing short of magic to me. There are also, we know that primates use tools and various types of problem solving. There's swarm intelligence and so on. And there's also different things like that have already been used, in some ways or another, as an example for developing technologies like the abilities of bats and dolphins, applying those in like submarines and so on. So this is all pretty familiar. It's not that new, but what might be kind of slightly new to people is that to the full extent of which we've used animals to specifically augment our own abilities. So starting from when oxen first replaced humans to like human labor with animal power, which changed agricultural productivity and really truly changed human societies. After that, we had obviously had horses and so on, and horses changed even more. Horses changed, for example, warfare. But then even a bit more recently, and perhaps surprisingly, different navies around the world, like US Navy is renowned for using dolphins for various tasks. And actually there are quite a few animal trainers who've talked about that experience, that they are training dolphins to do tasks that humans cannot do, and actually technology also cannot do. The dolphins do it better than any technology that the US military currently has. And so, but this goes back a long time. There's, we've been using, US Army has used things like bat bombs and so on. So this goes a long way. But I thought I'd use one particular example. So because dogs are our oldest ally and companion, they've been around with us for like 15,000 years. And so they are really the closest example. And also I know them best. So we're going to focus on dog. And dogs in particular have also helped us in so many ways. They are used in World War II for various tasks. For example, they've, very gruesomely, they were trained to carry explosives and around enemy tanks. So dogs are a very good example of the wide variety of things that we've asked animals to do. Some animals are more like a one-trick pony, pun intended, but dogs are very, very versatile. And every dog the dog is a specialist. So this is part of how I started thinking about how we should maybe compare LLMs to animal intelligence, because I have hunting dogs, but I have spaniels, and their job is very different from, for example, pointers and setters. Spaniels, their job is to flush animals or make up birds or make them fly so that they could be shot. I don't hunt myself, but that's their job. That is their job. Whereas setters and pointers, their job is to work very independently, whereas spaniels work very closely with the human. They work very independently to locate the birds that freeze when they are scared, and then wait, and then basically point to them. This comes with a very, very different cognitive abilities to some extent, and also kind of like different behavioral aspects and what you can expect from different types of dogs. And even more broadly, if you think of there's a group of dogs called shepherds, you'll have the border collies, kelpies, and the German shepherds, and they have very, very different jobs. The German shepherds work as a sort of a living fence. They basically run the perimeter of the sheep. Whereas the border collies, they are very closely, like they sort of work with the human and then guide the sheep to where the human, according to human instructions. So they're very attuned to human thinking. And then you have kelpies that are very, very different indeed, because their job is to herd. It requires a very different temperament to herd cows. So there's a lot of variety even within one species. And using dogs is kind of it's such a versatile example, because we're still using dogs. We're not, technology hasn't actually advanced beyond dogs' capabilities. You might think of dogs like just pets, and that's very, very common. And so did I, until I started learning about their incredible abilities. So dogs can actually detect COVID, malaria, cancer, stress, all of those, pretty much almost all, either just as efficiently as technology, or in many cases better than any technology that human has developed. So there are definitely this is kind of my foundation of kind of talking about that humans are not necessarily as superior as we like to think that we are. So, and this kind of led me to think about, we're coming back to AI. I promise this from now on is AI and not dogs. So this is where there's a parallel in my mind, and I started to see this parallel AI development. So while there's all the talk of artificial general intelligence or AGI, and we're kind of trying to, there's also the other side of this, which is narrow AI. And where I really started to get start with this was looking at how many people were talking about generative AI and kind of talking about it as being not very good because it wasn't exactly performing exactly like humans are. And to me, that seemed a little bit strange. And I realized that intuitively, I had thought of interacting with LLMs and the chatbots a lot like I would interact with my dogs, and I don't expect them to understand absolutely everything I say. Sometimes my communication is not very clear, and that's that is how those are some of the assumptions and premises that I brought into that conversation. And so I started to think, what if we shifted our focus from creating human-like AI to much more specialized AI, and also how does that change our definition of success? Now, and what possibilities could there be if we actually didn't try to replace humans, but started focusing on how to complement it? And so the other side that I think one of the opportunities that this could bring is we can learn from animal training and bring that to to AI interaction. So even though AI, like LLMs and animals are obviously very, very different, some of the core principles operate remarkably similarly. So, and I realized that the man is standing on water. I did notice that, and I thought that was funny enough to kind of just leave that in there, that he is walking on water, and the dolphin is flying. So my thinking was, if we apply some of these principles from animal behavior and animal training, we could possibly foster a more intuitive relationship with AI, with generative AI in particular. I've shortened it to AI here, so but possibly others as well. And so, thinking about it, instead of thinking of the chatbots and LLMs as tools, we could think of it as, think of it as cultivating sort of digital companions that kind of work with us. And so, what is there something we could do with that? And so just a very brief intro to operant conditioning, because I realize that most people are probably not amateur dog trainers or don't think about this. And so operant conditioning is same as learning, also known as sort of learning theory. It's the foundation of animal training and modifying behavior. And so the basic principle is how you can influence a behavior, someone's behavior through the consequences that occur after that behavior. Not all of the components of operant conditioning are relevant for AI, but understanding the flow of A, B, C antecedent, behavior, and consequence are can be quite useful for working with generative AI. So antecedent is when something happens, so there's a trigger or an event or whatever it might be. Behavior is what the subject does, whether it is a dog, human, or an LLM. And then the consequence is something that happens after the behavior. It doesn't necessarily have to be done in real life. It doesn't have to be something that someone else specifically applies. It's just that it's a consequence of your behavior. And that, whether you experience that as pleasant or unpleasant, that influences how likely you are to do that behavior in the future. And so that's really the very, very quick run through. And so some time ago, I actually started, I actually worked with Claude on creating a guide. I wanted to see how it would work to actually work almost like a partner with Claude. This was maybe 9 months ago now. And I created this guide, which is meant to be sort of just an interesting showcase. You can find it on my website. And it's, I started exploring what might operant conditioning techniques apply to interacting with chatbots. So, for example, we can use positive reinforcement. So this is, includes people praising or expressing approval for helpful information. So you would also, you might have also seen some conversations around, like, should we say please and thank you to LLMs, and why does it work? That's possibly why. I came into this without really having a programming background or a tech background, and I sort of started to wonder, why am I getting such good results out of this, even though I'm not very, I'm not taking a very structured approach to prompting. And I think then I realized that I am intuitively using some of the same techniques as I'm using when I'm working with my dogs. So positive reinforcement is one of them. Then there's also like a more advanced technique called shaping, which means that when you are rewarding someone or something, in this case, getting closer and closer to what you want them to do. And so this could be humans providing feedback that gets the AI to respond, getting closer to what they're actually looking for. And then also there's chaining, which is you teach a full sequence of complex behaviors by reinforcing each step in order, and then link them together. And this is kind of similar to quite a couple of the more complex prompting techniques that have been discussed kind of in the past couple of months or a bit more recently. It just struck me that there are such parallels with these ideas. And so, yeah, this is kind of the application of these techniques in LLMs. Shaping is kind of asking open-ended questions and iterating through feedback and drafts and refinements. That is the same as shaping. Then you have chaining. So you might start from initial goals to outline draft sections, revisions, and so on. That is also that's chaining. And then you also can leverage something called extinction process, which is when someone is engaging in a behavior you don't want them to do, you very politely, you ignore them and you don't reinforce that or punish it, or you don't react to that at all. So you can also use that when you're interacting with your LM chatbot. And so how you can apply these, there's providing frequent positive reinforcement, shaping the behaviors that you want to see, chaining workflows, and then focusing on the improvement through the conversation rather than having very prescriptive patterns. And then if you need to use negative punishment very sparingly, that applies. Negative punishment is when you don't give someone the reward or reinforcement. And so use these very sparingly because they're not good. They're not very positive for a relationship, whether it's a human dog or the LM, even though the LM doesn't really remember you afterwards, after the conversation. And so, the kind of like the way that I would like to take this conversation is to redefine success from competition to collaboration. And so what that could help with is, for example, having clearer expectations of what generative AI and AI in general can do, having more of an appreciation that it has specialized capabilities and limitations. So you might, I've seen quite a few people like, oh, well, it's not as good as, or it's not. People expect when we're comparing a generative AI or chatbots to humans, there is a different expectation to how they might operate or how they might perform. And I realize this because when I'm working with my dogs, I don't think of it as training as top down, as me dictating something. It's always a conversation between two creatures, two beings. And if I ask my dog to do something and they don't do it, the first question I ask is, was I clear in communicating that? That's how I also approach interacting with the chatbots. And I hadn't realized that until I started thinking about this, that maybe that kind of perspective shift would be helpful, that we take a different, we're slightly kinder to them and kind of more understanding and adjust our approach. Then we could also reduce a little bit our anxiety about whether LLMs will take our jobs, but while still appreciating the non-human strengths. We could also, if we focused on augmentation than replacing humans, that could be lead to more ethical development, and then focus on complementing human skills rather than replacing them. And then overall, I think thinking about shifting our perspective, or at least having that as a complementary way to view AI instead of just humans, but we might have other benchmarks and other examples to use as inspiration. That could help us see AI more as a companion and kind of foster a more collaborative relationship. And so, that could really help with kind of repositioning it as teamwork between humans and AI. So, and then obviously there's lots of examples of these successful human AI collaborations, like medical diagnosis and in scientific research and different creative fields. So there are lots of examples of already how we can do that. Yeah, that's just a thought. And so for me, the message I want to leave with you is that the future of AI doesn't have to be a story about, will they replace us or will they take our jobs? Will they overtake us? It could be a story of symbiosis and collaboration, like we've had with various animals for thousands of years. So they haven't replaced us so far, and I don't think they will. And if we shift our benchmark from human to animal intelligence, or just broaden it, not necessarily shift it completely, but broaden it, we could open up new possibilities. So we could start to think about whether specialized AI systems would be, if we should kind of shift our focus from a lot of general AI to more specialized ones, having more collaborative and less fearful relationship with AI. And then also maybe that could inspire some innovation and expand the opportunities or the applications of AI. And so, yeah, the question I want you to kind of leave with you today is, how would your work or your research change if you started thinking of AI as a digital, instead of not as a digital human, but as a digital animal, like your companion? And that's really the bigger question I want to leave with you today. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, Elina. We have a comment from
Sure.
Shaista. She says offering bribes to LLMs works to get better responses. Totally right about applied operant conditioning. It deserves more exploration.
Yeah. And Shaista, that is, you call it a bribe. In dog training, people often call rewards or having treats or something else as a bribe. But actually, there are two different ways. One is to reward for a behavior already done. So that's the reinforcement. When someone's already done something, that is reinforcement or a reward. But if you are talking about saying something before you ask the LM to do something and kind of bribe them, then that is more like luring. That's also an animal training technique, and you kind of like tempt them into doing something, and then it's like, well, you've done it now. So there's, or bribing as coercion. There's different ways to think about it, but yes, I found that definitely sometimes it helps if I, for example, say, I really, really need your help. I want to impress my boss or something. It doesn't matter because it doesn't remember. But sometimes all these things do help, and being nice to LLMs more often than not, it does seem to improve the performance, even anecdotally and from the research. So I think there's a lot of interesting research coming out on this.
Who do you think you can lend a hand to if somebody wants to develop and train one of these specialized models?
What do you mean? Sorry, I'm not sure I understand.
So the premise of this presentation is, how do we shift the perspective from giving human characteristics to LLMs? How do we train them to serve a specialized function with context and all that from your behavioral strategist background?
Well, I would say that good starting point would be to think about what is the job that we want them to do, because I sort of missed that point with specialized dogs. But for example, you would not ask a spaniel whose job is to basically find birds with their nose and do so whether there's freezing cold water, there's spiky bushes, doesn't matter what's there. Their job is to follow that scent and then make the bird fly. You would never ask that. You would never expect that they would be able to herd sheep. never ever, because that is not, it's unrealistic. And vice versa. Like, I was just on a walk yesterday with my friend who has two border collies, and the border collies looked at my dogs like they're crazy. Like, why would you go into that bush? That's insane. Like, we would like to, that's not what they want to do. It's not part of the skill set, but it doesn't make them less capable. They're just specialized in a very different job. And so I think the starting point of there's, what do we want? What is the job that we want to get this particular application of AI to do? And then what capabilities does it need for that? And actually, then you can make it more efficient by just stripping out the rest, because spaniels don't need the ability to kind of basically track things with their eyes and kind of make sure that they're all lined up and like count up how many sheep are there. It serves no purpose at all. It's waste. So it's kind of, you need to think about what is it you need them to do, and then think from that perspective. And that's kind of how we've used animals in general. Is like, we have, if you were a couple of 100 years ago, you would have had multiple different kinds of dogs. If you're running an estate, like rich people, you would have had 2-3 different kinds of, maybe 4 kinds of hunting dogs, all for a special purpose. Then you would have dogs that guard the livestock when you're not there. They would, you would have some that do the sheep herding. So that's no different to, I don't know, I think of using different LLMs as well, like LLM stacking. A bit like that is that, I find that sometimes Mistral goes much more to the point, and it's much more, it's very good at that. But then for something more creative and more empathetic, it's not very empathetic, but Claude is much more, I don't know, sympathetic entity to speak to. So it's kind of thinking of, speaking of creatures, the non-domesticated companion animal has making an appearance. So I've also had cats. So I appreciate.
I'm trying to train my cat to do financial advisory, but she won't. She doesn't want to stick with it. So, but anyways,
yeah. There's some interesting comments like, emotions make humans complex. Well, actually, animals also have a lot of emotions. Definitely a lot. I will always focus on just dogs, but because that's the research I read the most. But definitely there is a lot in that. And then there's is there any other questions? I don't know if AI will consider us as organic pets. That's beyond my sphere of knowledge at the moment. So, but yeah, it was. I think there's so much to think about this, and kind of how. I mean, I would really encourage reading both like Ethan Mollick's Co-Intelligence. It's really good, but it's from a practical perspective, because that's kind of his something he talks about a lot, very practically, about what does that look like. But also a very eye-opening book to read, even though it's about robots, is Kate Darling's A New Breed. She goes into a lot more detail about how we have used animals to. It was very humbling to realize that humans are actually pretty useless, to be honest. So it's kind of makes me think, like, why are humans actually the benchmark for why are humans the benchmark for artificial intelligence, when we're actually so useless that we've had to use a range of animal species across thousands of years, because we probably wouldn't have survived, certainly not thrived, without them. And so it's, I don't know, that's a very controversial point of view for some people, but I challenge you to read A New Breed, and it might change how you see things. Like, wow, we're really pointless, despite all our skills. So yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Elina, for this wonderful presentation, and I hope we've given somebody in the crowd a different perspective on this matter.
Oh, I will also, if you don't mind, I'll share, if anyone, it's not meant to be like it's not meant to be a kind of a comprehensive guide to LMs or anything like that. But if, out of curiosity, if anyone's interested in that co-authored paper with Claude guide, I'll just put that here. It's more of an interesting experiment than that comprehensive resource. So there we go. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to the other talks.
Thank you, Elina. We're gonna go into the networking, so feel free to just slip into that feature and meet new people.